without much ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the evening, Dr. Wendy Harrison, who is the CEO of the SCI Foundation. That's Wendy's current role, and the SCI Foundation, it partners with the Ministry of Health to support the delivery of comprehensive programs to eliminate parasitic infections, focusing on schistosomiasis and soil-transmitted helminths. Wendy trained and practiced as a veterinary surgeon. She holds an MPH and a PhD in clinical pharmacology. Wendy has also held an honorary professor position at the Royal Veterinary College. Wendy is an advocate of the One Health approach and is a consumer on the Lancet One Health Commission, and was involved in the development of the recently launched One Health companion document to the WHO NTD roadmap. So I'm very pleased indeed to invite Wendy to talk tonight to her topic, contributing evidence and expertise to inform pandemic prevention and response strategies, and how policymakers can support researchers' engagement in policy making. Thank you, Wendy.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for that kind introduction, and so lovely to be with you on this rather warm evening. So I'm going to start off with some introductions to One Health principles. I'm going to start with a very short quiz just on One Health key facts. Many of the answers to these I'm sure you will know. So first of all, what percentage of all existing human infectious diseases are zoonotic? Is it 60, 10 or 30? And I'm sure you know that it's actually 60% of all existing infectious diseases come from animal origin. Secondly, our key fact 2, of emerging infectious diseases, the percentage of which are from animal origin are 15%, 75% or 95%. And again, I'm sure you know that 3/4 of all emerging infections are zoonotic. And then lastly, the third key fact is the number of people that rely directly on livestock to assure their livelihoods and food security. Is it 500 million, 2 billion or 1.3 billion? And it's actually 1.3 billion, which is about it's about 1 in 6 people on the planet currently. So I hope that that underlines the linkage between animals and human health, but One Health principles are actually much broader than that. And I'd like to demonstrate this by answering the question, what does Ebola have to do with the price of fish? So if we start with fish, in 2013, changes were made in Brussels to the common fisheries policy, and that arguably contributed to the largest outbreak of Ebola in history, some 5,000 miles away on the west coast of Africa. The sustainability partnership agreements that were being put into place at this time allowed EU fishing rights in third countries in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. And this, in conjunction with illegal fishing, depleted fish stocks and really endangered the marine ecosystems along the West African coast. This significantly reduced the availability of fish for local markets in coastal villages, where locally caught fish really represented the primary source of protein. So these coastal communities then had to source bushmeat to replace this essential source of protein, which obviously brought communities into really close contact with wild animal species that were potentially vectors for Ebola. And in addition, there is increasing deforestation in these West African countries. Now, deforestation obviously leads to widespread loss of biodiversity, but also reduces food sources such as fruit, which means that animals of different species come into even closer contact around those remaining food sources. Also, as well as this overall loss of biodiversity, researchers have suggested that forest fragmentation actually reduces species that are highly adapted to their habitats, but allows more generalist species like gorillas and chimpanzees, who are obviously potential hosts for Ebola, to actually increase in these areas. And some studies have also suggested that the African bat species with the highest likelihood of being a filovirus host appears to exhibit a broader habitat tolerance, and therefore may be even more abundant in these fragmented forests. So the first case of Ebola was identified in Guinea in 2014, and the weak surveillance systems and underfunded public health infrastructure contributed to difficulty in containment of this outbreak, and it quickly spread to Guinea's bordering countries, Liberia and Sierra Leone. And 2.5 years later, after that first case was discovered, the outbreak ended with more than 28,000 cases and 11,000 deaths. So I think this really tragically illustrates the complexity of the interaction between ecosystems, animals, and humans. And if we are going to prepare for and prevent these outbreaks, which do have pandemic potential, the balance between each of these really needs to be considered. And this is what really encapsulates the One Health approach. And here I've used the quadripartite definition, the quadripartite being a grouping of UN agencies, the World Health Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, the UN Environment Programme, and the Food and Agricultural Organization. And this definition really just underlines that really close interlinkage and interdependency on those three systems. So in the second part of my talk, we're just going to start thinking about what are the evidence and expertise to inform pandemic prevention and response, and how policymakers can support researchers' engagement in policymaking. And I think one of the most important aspects is to consider, actually, as is outlined in the quadripartite definition, is that evidence needs to come from all levels of society and not only academic institutions. And the power of Indigenous and community knowledge is really crucial. Now, the evidence clearly needs to be from multiple disciplines. And as we saw from that Ebola example, human and animal health, including aquaculture, ecosystems and biodiversity, but also the importance of understanding impacts on other sectors such as tourism, where tourists may come in contact with wildlife, and also, as we saw, the impact of global policy shifts. And the current CEO of UKRI, who's obviously a huge advocate of cross-disciplinary work, also suggests that there's a separation really between problems where we can share expertise from one discipline to another and solve a problem, so such as vaccinating dogs for rabies, that actually reduces the incidence of human rabies. But there are those more complex problems where existing disciplinary knowledge really is not enough, and only through transdisciplinary working will we be able to come up with novel solutions, these challenges demand, and that really is around pandemic preparedness. And I think this slide for me, which illustrates the Buddhist parable of the blind men and the elephant, really shows perfectly that imperative to ensure that our own partial experiences and knowledge are not mistaken for the whole truth, when in fact really understanding the complexity of the reality of the situation requires considering the whole system, regardless of our own discipline or lens. So there are obviously real benefits for this kind of cross and multi-sectoral working. However, there are inevitably barriers and challenges. And disciplinary silos do exist, and there are power imbalances between these silos, and there's real concerted efforts needed to overcome this. And in my own field of neglected tropical diseases, significant investment has been made to develop a strategy and tools for the health and the water and sanitation sectors to work closely together to collect and collate data to better target disease prevention interventions and inform national policy. There's also the need to further develop and invest in expertise of collaboration and synthesis of information, which is another discipline in its own right, but also recognise that this really does require dedicated resource. And recognising that working across disciplines does require additional effort and skills, and this does need to be recognised. Also, as I mentioned, that importance of incorporating lived and community knowledge, which is so important for contextualising and gaining a deeper understanding of the evidence that we generate. Funding streams are obviously still primarily determined in those disciplinary silos. And also there are some challenges around understanding the priorities of policymakers and being able to effectively respond. And so lastly, some opportunities that I'm sure my fellow panelists will touch on further. But firstly, the Royal Society and the Academy of Medical Sciences have developed principles of good evidence synthesis that lays out 4 guiding principles that really support researchers in the development of outputs that are useful to policymakers. And the government's Area for Research Interest initiative that responded to recommendations of the Review of Research Councils that sets out details about the main research questions facing government departments, which is enormously helpful. But there's also a need to support researchers to engage in these priorities by publishers as well as funders and get recognition for the contribution to policy, which is currently not very well rewarded. Similarly, inter and transdisciplinary work isn't well recognised in current evaluation frameworks for researchers. And this is a problem, as it would be beneficial to get the best evidence synthesis for policymakers, for those researchers at the top end of their career to contribute. And the third initiative, which aims to address some of these challenges, is the UKRI's Resume for Research and Innovation. And this really aims to recognise this contribution by researchers to policy, rather than just the traditional CV that's based on publication in high impact journals. So it is really contributing to overcoming some of those barriers. And I think I will stop there and look forward to answering any questions and participating in the discussion, and thank you very much for listening.